We're excited to welcome Jack here. Jack has been a member of the group for almost 2 years. Joined us in October 21st, 2014. So we're excited to have him present today. It's cleaned up our group a lot. We're all a bunch of lushes, and it's nice to have a sobering force in here to guide us on the straight path, the straight narrative. So Jack, again, I hope everybody took my words in the email and did respect him and come in sober this morning. So let's all take it away, Jack.
Thank you, Dan. I thought I'd tell you how I came to become a forgiveness guy instead of giving you the spiel. This goes really back to 1985, and I did a week-long workshop at the Meadows, which is now a very famous treatment center in Arizona. And at that time it was just opening, and they invited a group of therapists in to do our own family work. Well, what happened on that week, they also asked us not to do any of our addictions during that week. And I said, well, I don't have an addiction, I just eat a lot of chocolate, and I can do that, that'd be easy to do, and all this other stuff. But anyway, they really got us into our feelings, and by Thursday evening, I was a basket case. I stayed in I had a van then, as I do now, and I was sleeping in the van, or trying to sleep in the van, and I went through all sorts of cold sweats and whatnot, and I really felt like I understood what Christ felt at Gethsemane. And so the next day, I brought up these feelings in the group, and the therapist says, what's behind the door? I mentioned the door. What's behind the door? And I had a memory of my cousin, Bobby, when he was about 3 years old, grabbing at my genitals, and I was on the bed right next to a window, and I fell out the window and missed a picket fence and fell into a tulip patch. And so I left that day, at least I identified that, and then over the next 3 weeks, I couldn't sleep. I was just bouncing around and whatnot, so I went back to the Meadows. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona at the time, about 50 miles away. And I went back to the Meadows, and I met with Fred Downey, who was the therapist. And I said, the number 3 keeps coming up. And he said, were you 3 months gestation, 3 months old, or 3 years old? And I said, oh shit, and then I had this memory of my father abusing me when I was 3 years old, sexually abusing me. Well, that started a whole round of therapy and trying to adjust. Being a therapist was really being a challenge. And there were some days that I was wondering who the patients were and who the therapist was. And that really concerned me professionally. And so I started seeing, through a friend of mine, I started seeing a therapist. And also what happened with the therapist is she believed everything I said. And I had already made a plan when I went to the Meadows to go back and confront my father. And I went back to Massachusetts and confronted my father, and I was compelled to go by this Catholic church, St. Francis, which was an Italian church. And I walked in the door, and I just got the cold sweats, and I raced out of there, and I knew something had happened there. So over the next year or so, with therapy, and I got a massage therapist, which was absolutely wonderful. And she really helped me to deal with all the feelings I had in my body that would come up. And so between the therapies and whatnot, I was able to start recovering from the experiences I had when I was a kid. I wrote a letter to my family members, and they all told me I was full of crap. And then nothing happened to them, even though the girls are all 30 to 50 pounds overweight and all the boys are cocaine addicts. But nothing happened to them when they were kids. And later I did have one brother who came forward and said, me too. So that was pretty comforting. And I didn't feel like a lone wolf crying in the desert. So what I started to do, because I work with alcoholism and drug addiction a lot, is I started asking people how they, all I would say was, how were you abused as a child? because they go hand in hand, I learned. And people would start talking about how they were abused as kids, either physically, emotionally, or spiritually. So my practice evolved into addiction and trauma. And I learned how to do a therapy called EMDR, or eye movement desensitization. And actually, I was doing pretty well until 2001 hit, and the Boston Archdiocese exploded with all the sexual abuse accusations, and now we have this new film, Spotlight. I had called the Archdiocese about 3 years before that happened, and I told them what happened to me, and they told me, well, nobody else has ever reported anything about this priest, and he was dead, so they weren't going to investigate. So when that spotlight, when the controversy exploded, I went bonkers, that I had once more believed in the goddamn Catholic Church, and they just blocked me off with the guy who's going to say prayers to me. And so, as you can tell, I had a lot of anger then, and I still have a lot of anger now. But the thing that I've learned over the years was to heal, was to be able to forgive. And I'm still working on the church, as you know. You can tell by my responses. And what I have found out is that by going through this process, and one that I've developed and I put the sheet into on everybody's place, is once I can go through this process, I can free myself of the angst and the anger and the hopelessness and whatnot that goes with holding a grudge and being angry. Also, what happened is that when I first started with the therapist way back in the 80s, I had ulcerative colitis and ulcers. Not very comfortable. So I started seeing this massage therapy, the therapist, and we started dealing with my rage, and they disappeared within 2 months. I have never had a symptom since. And that was just amazing to me. That was just like this miracle. And it really showed me how much our physical ailments have to do with our emotional and our spiritual health. The reason I am passionate about forgiveness, it has completely changed my life. I am 75 years old and I feel like I'm 34. When I was 34, I felt like I was 75. Or was supposed to be 75. And I have a teenage daughter that I keep up with. And she even dances with me when I take her dancing. So I feel blessed. But the thing about forgiveness is that we do it for ourselves. We don't do it for the other person. People say, oh, I'm not going to forgive them. They, after what they did to me, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to forgive them. Like I'm giving, but really what I'm giving them is a recipe for mental health, for good mental health, and good spiritual health, and good physical health. And so that's what forgiveness is about. It's not letting somebody off the hook. It's allowing ourselves to relieve ourselves of the burden of all the anger and rage and all the physical and emotional and spiritual ailments that go with that. Thank you.
All right, great, Jack. Any feedback, questions for Jack?
Yes,
Good question. So, let's suppose you're injured or something by someone does an injury to you. What would you say, is it necessary to forgive the person, or how about just to hell with them and just move on and don't think about the person anymore? What do you think is the difference between the two?
well, if you can move on, then that's fine. I think that would be a form of forgiveness, of not taking it personally. And so it would be accepting the fact that it happened and relieving the other person, relieving yourself of all the feelings that you have to.
Isn't it like if you don't let it go, you're letting them have self-control over you?
No, well, I'll tell you the reason why I thank you for asking this question. The ultimate revenge is that the person is running your life if you're not forgiving them. And so that you don't go certain places or you don't do certain activities because that person might be there or you had an experience with a person at that kind of event, whatnot, so that your life stops being controlled by somebody else and whatever they did to you to harm you. And I'll tell you what happened with my father. I broke off a relationship with him for 2 years, and then he was in the hospital and looked like he was going to die. And so I had forgiven him, and I started calling him in the hospital. And he wanted me to call him Friday nights before he went to bed. And so I would call him, and since I didn't have all the anger and rage and whatnot about, what he had done to me, and that he didn't protect me from the priest and my grandfather, I was able to have a positive relationship with him for the last 2 years of his life. And I learned things about him that I would have never learned any other way. He told me about his childhood. He told me about, I asked him what it was like in the Depression. My grandparents were from Italy, and they were eating potato soup just about every night of the week. And so he told me about courting my mother. And so there was this richness in our relationship before he died that would have never been there if I hadn't forgiven him. And I feel like that was a real blessing. Yes?
What does forgiveness mean?
Forgiveness means is to let go of the pain toward the other person, and also to basically absolve them of what they did. Like, for example, I'll just give you an example. I knew if my grandfather was abusing me, he abused my father. I knew that if the priest abused me, he was abusing my father. It was some sort of ritual within the Italian Catholic Church. And so I was able to see their humanity. And once I could see their humanity, it was easier for me to forgive them.
No, Jim, got a question.
Yes, sir.
Characterize the distinction for me in your mind between forgiveness and reconciliation.
Forgiveness is you only need one person for forgiveness. Reconciliation means you and the other person, whoever did wrong apologizes, or maybe you both did wrong, and you both apologize, and you make amends to each person makes amends to the other. So that's reconciliation, so you can continue a friendship.
Is it always possible to reconcile?
I don't think so. It really depends how serious the crime was, really. But there have been, there's a story that I read about 2 years ago. There was this woman, and this man murdered her son. He was 22, 23 years old. She went and visited the man who murdered her son in prison and was able to forgive them. And then he got out of prison, and she lived in a duplex house. He lived on the other side of the duplex. I said, this woman's a saint.
I'd say that's pushing it.
That's pushing
This woman is a real saint to do that.
So we're out of time, but Jack, thank you very much.